Hello and welcome everyone. We've got another session for you today with our Veeam partners. Today we're going to talk about key infrastructure components for securing modern IT. My name is Carl Camilleri. I am Cloud Services Product Manager at phoenixNAP. And with me today is Michael Deemer, Inside Sales Engineer at Veeam. Hello, Mike.
Hey, thanks for having me, Carl.
Thanks for joining us. So, as we proceed, we wanted to have a little bit of understanding around our audience. We felt it would be great to share a couple of polls with you. This is more to have a better understanding of where are you coming from, what is your strategy going forward, what are your plans. So this could help us a little bit deviate during the presentation, considering the information that you give us here. So we'll give this a couple of seconds, then we have another poll question which follows on the same concept. So the poll question that we're bringing up is which of these challenges have you been dealing with? So first we wanted to ask you about how are you hosting your current infrastructure, and here we'd more like to understand on what are the challenges that you're facing, what are the imminent risks that you see going forward. All right, so we wanted to kick this off to talk a little bit around data protection trends and challenges. We wanted to show the slide as to kind of give you a little bit of an understanding of how data is becoming all around each end device, each user, and surrounded within any organization, right? You have data that is being well managed, well maintained, but then you have applications which are handling complex configurations where data protection, keeping up data protection is challenging. So we want to understand how data is between hybrid deployments, whether that is private cloud, whether that is hosted cloud, and infrastructure deployment models are varying. In a way that the data would provide with high priority, we want to understand that the tolerance of being able to keep up to data losses is less than an hour. And on the right-hand side of the screen, we can see some insight that we've got from the Data Protection Trends report from our friends at Veeam that show us a little bit of understanding on what is being reported on monthly outages by cyber attacks, which is all figures are quite extraordinary, but to say the least, how are we able to keeping up security requirements, right? How are we able to measure the increase in cyber attacks that has been impacting us recently, considering the recent COVID requirements that everyone had to redeploy? In a nutshell, the challenges and trends that are facing customers, that what we hear from customers are vary. So as we proceed to the next slide, we can kind of understand a little bit more in detail of the causes of outages, right? So what is affecting these causes of outages? And while we understand on how servers suffer at least 40% of servers suffer at least one unexpected outage a year, one might have to understand the ability on how we can measure that, first of all, right? Because the customers that we see often, they have a little bit of an understanding on their security posture, but they're not really aware of the risks related to the outage. In terms of how IT leaders are estimating downtime costs, we see that figure, a per minute figure. We're seeing how users are making mistakes by the time the data loss is detected, where assets may be permanently gone, so it would be a little bit too little too late. And how are even administrators making mistakes, right? Lack of diligence, lack of having a common plan of patching and upgrading systems, and being able to be organized, right, in an IT world where you have multiple applications that one needs to maintain, while being able to serve your end users, right, serve your customers or your employees. And on the right-hand side of the screen, where we listed a little bit on the causes of outage per percentage, and what we can see here are different values around the top causes of serious IT service outage. Cybersecurity at the very top, very worrying there, but that's the real situation that we live in. Accidental data deletion, overwrite, or corruption, where we have users which might have access permissions to large volumes of data, and they might not be that tech savvy, where they'll be doing some kind of data changes within an organization. Infrastructure and network outage, often the case where even a third party would be involved, right? So not necessarily within an organization, but you are relying on third parties in order to keep up with the ability to, for example, prevent power outage. So as we go further down the list, we kind of understand a little bit the difference between the outages that are impacting us. And some of the details that fall into those categories could be, for example, a corrupted firewall rule, right? That also falls into not able to maintain a proper security posture, having a DDoS attack, or perhaps a configuration or change management, right? Something that we see often where we have internal maintenance of systems through a chain management configuration, and we understand how these could also affect negatively the availability of the service that you offer. And as we can proceed to the next slide, here we can understand a little bit why security teams are falling behind, right? So what is the primary reason that the enterprise IT teams strategies sometimes fail, right? And this could be to a multiple of reasons, right? So you have sophisticated threat landscape where things are changing fast. Providers and vendors are updating and releasing new feature sets in order to be able to handle and your team to maintain and keep abreast with. Complex security stack. So this is tied to what I was saying, but more into vendor lock-in as well, where we can see that some of the ways that organizations end up going is through a very hardened security posture with a third-party provider, but then that brings with it vendor lock-in issues, right? So one would need to understand a little bit there on the ties that one would have. So lack of skilled workforce is another factor that we see often, where teams are not able to keep abreast with maintaining a full IT support team that could able to handle the workload that the IT team is always facing. And lack of automation, right? This comes at a cost. It comes at various high resource at first, but then the ways that we can understand lack of automation benefits that it provides, the organizations tend to understand how systems and things work better when there is non-human intervention involved. So it's not always the case, but that's the big help from automation. And the idea of something else that might not be mentioned here is how rapidly evolving IT environment is, right? So you have the risk of not being able to identify the right resources for the right requirements that you're after. So that's something which we see very often. As we go on to the next slide, building blocks of a secure cloud infrastructure. So what is the consistent security controls that we need to look after? Physical, so how we're able to choose top-tier facilities, whether that is supporting whether that's a third party who's supporting our own private cloud, whether there it's internal support, whether there it's third-party providers who might have some security access. How are we auditing? How are we measuring that area of defense there? So it's very important, sometimes underrated, but physical security is a must when looking at securing proper cloud infrastructure. Network, so as mentioned, using advanced firewall configurations, DDoS protection, intrusion detection, threat management and response. These are all things that kind of fall as part of the network team. It is shared between network and security because this is a very vulnerable area, right? This is where all your endpoints are at, and all of the traffic that is being transacted between the public network and your internal network often has to go through all of these that were mentioned there. So that's a very, very area which it's easier for us to be able to say, hey, okay, our network security posture is as strong as possible because all components kind of fall within a network environment. So moving on application, where the use of endpoints around antivirus, malware protection, having the use of multi-factor authentication, right? Being able to manage and regularly log all transactions happening on each application. This will give you a better idea on which are the areas one needs to harden, which are the areas one needs to be looking at as well. So having a good idea on role-based access control is part of having to maintain the list of permissions that are for each application that you have, but this gives you a bit of an idea on crucial parts of securing cloud infrastructure. The user, sometimes often related to as quite the risk area where one can understand why we have certain users not fully aware, sometimes as much of as we know in the IT market, but this is coupled a lot with building a secure culture on maintaining multi-factor authentication, continuous training and education, right, around how they could possibly be targeted, by showing examples, by even testing your users, right, providing certain false positives to understand which areas of your employees might need further training and might need further awareness on this area, and providing the right password management solutions, considering now all systems are cloud-based solutions where a set of credentials are always needed, and we're not seeing as single sign-on as we wish it would be, but it's still a factor where one has to maintain multiple sets of credentials, right? And we do this as phoenixNAP to help maintain our product posture, but one can understand when you have multiple users that needs to be maintained in terms of that area. And last but not least, data, which is encrypted, hopefully at rest and in transit, because the way we're seeing is now that although that you are maintaining a very solid data repository in your cloud infrastructure, one has to make sure that the provider where you're hosting or the provider that is maintaining your cloud is actually encrypting the data in transit. Obviously, this sometimes comes at a cost as well in terms of how high impact it is on the data that is being transacted, but the ability to have encrypted data across the board is very important. and being able to manage the lifecycle policies, right, the retention, and eventually destruction and archiving of any backups or repositories that one would have hosted on a cloud repository, or whether that's even on premise. And moving on to the next slide will be Mr. Michael Deemer. Sorry there, I wasn't sure if this is my slide still or not. So thank you, Mike. I'll leave it up to you. And thank you so much for being with us today.
Of course. Well, thanks for having me. And good morning and good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name is Michael D.
All right. We might have lost Mike there.
All the way for, types of verticals really go into exactly what I'm going to be talking about here today, right? These admin mistakes are something that I see almost every single day where, hey, you think you're configured in the right way, and unfortunately, it sometimes takes another set of eyes or, maybe a longer longevity in that particular role to understand that, hey, maybe I'm not best suited for every single specific need in vertical, and having that second pair of eyes in that environment really can do a lot of good from that particular perspective. Same thing with security teams, right? Their security teams are falling behind the step. Again, I see this a lot, especially in production environments. This isn't something that's, what we just talk about is, something that's in isolated, places in the world, or it's very, not really working for everybody else. This is something that I see everywhere, every single vertical, regardless of what is actually happening in the world. And that kind of moves me into specifically what I want to talk about today, which is the 3-2-1 rule. Yes, it does say 3-2-1-0, and I'll get to that in just a second. But this main rule is called 3-2-1. Now, if you guys have or have an understanding of 3-2-1, this is just going to be a refresher. But for you guys that are out there that are hearing this for the first time, take a mental note. This isn't a policy or a method that me or Veeam and phoenixNAP came up with and said, hey, this is a absolute mission critical rule. This is a rule made up decades and decades and decades ago. This is just honestly a backup rule that's good, best of all worlds, to making sure that you have your data and you have it accessible when you need it. Now, so let me kind of break this down. Thing I want to release before down here. If this is the first time you're hearing it and you have another backup vendor that's not Veeam, I would say take a big mental note and say, hey, take this. If they can't implement this in some form or fashion, I would pick up all your pieces of data and move to a new backup software. This isn't, again, anything that's new. This is just a good way to safeguard your data. All right, so let's break this down. So 3 copies of your data. In this particular case, these are called VBKs. What a VBK is at the end of the day is actually an active full. So think of these as 3 active fulls of your environment or your production environment. Now, that number 2 is really split into 2 different forms of media, right? So most of the time, we're talking about like maybe an SSD or NVMe drive, something quick, something fast, something that we can have a quick cache on, and we can move data, and IOPS isn't going to be the issue. And then on the other side of that, we need another piece of media, right? You can't always trust disk, or you always can't trust tape. But when you have 2 of them paired together, you have a lot more high likelihood or high chances that things aren't going to go awry. So tape is one of those, bread and butter things that's been in the backup realm for, I would guarantee pretty much since the beginning of backups in and of itself. Now, this one off-site, this is probably one of the more important rules. This is making sure that we have it at a data center or a colo. More specifically, what I'm talking about is phoenixNAP. So we have a piece of data that we have. Yes, we have 2 different forms of media, but we also have one off-site. So that way, just in case those 2 pieces of media themselves get corrupted, in the wrong hands, so on and so forth, you still have something that sits in the cloud. Now, let's break down this 0. Now, 0 basically means what we're going to do is we're going to run a verification. Now, this verification over the backups is called Sure Backup. Sure Backup is an automated testing environment that basically Veeam has for every single partner or every single client, I should say. And this is a way that you test your backups. So your initial backups get kicked off, whether that's, virtual machines or physical servers or cloud virtual machines. And then that, once it lands at the repository, gets pushed into what's called Sure Backup. Sure Backup is an isolated lab that allows you to do testing and making sure that data is good. Now, here on the next slide, I kind of want to walk you through what it would look like when ransomware hits. So I know this slide is kind of busy, so just bear with me when I break it down with you just a second. So I'm going to work from the left-hand side to the right-hand side. Bear with me on the red stuff. We'll get to the ransomware in just a second, but I really want to show you the main components first. So the main component that I see very first for is that orange hypervisor. So that is going to be maybe VMware, maybe it's going to be Hyper-V, or maybe Nutanix. And then below that, you're probably going to have some storage, right? Maybe it's HP, Nimble, NetApp, Dell, EMC. It really doesn't matter. Really what that's trying to portray there is saying we're agnostic, right? We really don't care about the storage arrays that you guys have. It could just be a simple NAS. It could be all the way up to, a high, maybe a Nimble device, whatever that may be. Now, on top of that hypervisor, we have our virtual machines, right? Now, those virtual machines, for the most part, maybe SQL, maybe Oracle, maybe they're just database and applications or files and folder data. But just think of that as your production environment, right? Now, a little bit to the right in that box that says Veeam, that is our Veeam backup and replication server. That is going to be the brains of the operation when we're talking about taking backups, taking restores, doing any type of manipulation with the data is going to be done there. Now, to the right, where that green line is, that's that on-demand sandbox that I just talked about on the last slide, right? So it's an isolated environment. We have a tape device and we have another backup target. All right, so moving our eyes back over to the hypervisor here, and we're looking at those virtual machines specifically. Well, what happens when we get hit with ransomware? Well, those virtual machines that are sitting in production, most of the time are going to be the attack vector that particular ransomware or exploit is really looking to capture, right? Because that's where the data is. Now, you'll get some type of message, and that's that little key to the left-hand side that says, hey, we accept Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever the particular currency they want to use at that particular time. Most of the time, it is some type of cryptocurrency or exchange for gift cards, but more importantly, it's probably cryptocurrency because they can just move it to a new wallet and they can flush those funds. So what happens when that actually happens? Okay, cool. So we don't have the availability to go to like an HD data store or the data domain because, well, the production is down, right? So what do we need to do? Well, the very first thing that we need to do is we need to make sure that we have a secure backup. And that's why we go to that sandbox environment and see what we have that's available to do restores. All right, so here on my next slide, I'm going to show you what it looks like to recover from storage snapshots. Now, in a normal world, I'm going to go over two different sides of the world, okay? There is I would say there's a lot of people still in the top queue, and there's still a lot of people in the bottom queue. Top queue is red, bottom queue is green. So the top queue, I'm going to say there's still a lot of people in this, and this is typical, right? People taking backups every single night. They don't have, and the biggest difference between the top queue and the bottom queue is monetary value. What they have for hardware, what they have for compliancy reasons, things like that. So those unprotected from 8 p.m. to 8 p.m. or 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. to 8 p.m., right? So you're taking just one nightly backup. But what happens if you had, ransomware in the middle of the day, right? You're going to be losing a lot of that particular types of data. You're not going to be able to be really granular for the types of data sets, rolling back to maybe 10 o'clock or 9 a.m., whatever that looks like. Now, under that second queue of leveraging modern storage snapshots, really the difference between the top guys and the bottom guys is honestly just monetary value for what kind of storage hardware they have. If the top guys had storage hardware, they could honestly do snapshots, but it takes a certain level of hardware to be able to fundamentally do that. So the biggest difference is grainability, right? Just going back 1 hour, 30 minutes, 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever that may look like to you, to have that very, very peace of mind feeling that, hey, if something happens, we have a good way to go back. Now, how do we restore data? That's kind of the little scheme down below, right? They're called our Veeam Explorer series. And this enables really either full or granular restores. It really doesn't matter which way we go there, right? And we have a couple different ones just here on the screen. I can tell you these 5 or 6 here on the screen are a very small snippet of what we actually can do. Exchange, Active Directory, Oracle, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. There's a lot of stuff that I just said that's not even on this particular page, but something that we absolutely do from time to time when we do restores. Now, here on our next slide, really what I want to go over is, yes, now we need to do some restore options. So kind of think of that same one that we had, not the slide ago, but the slide previously, same type of build. So the same type of architecture here. And now we need to know it's time to do a restore, right? So we have a couple different options here. If you see all those green lines, those are options. Now, I'm going to work from the right-hand side to the left-hand side. So in the bottom right where it has that little orange box and it says Veeam Cloud Connect. Well, what is Veeam Cloud Connect? At the end of the day, that's actually phoenixNAP. So if you have and you're adhering to that 3-2-1 policy, you could have reach out to phoenixNAP, reach out to your dedicated systems engineer or representative and say, hey, I need to do a copy or I need to get a data retrieval. And phoenixNAP will send it back to the Veeam backup or replication server, and that way you can start to manipulate it in any way that you technically want. Now, you could also do it from the backup target, right? So you can do a restore, you can do a virtual machine restore, maybe even you just want to do some granular restores for maybe some application items. You want to start testing inside of those. Maybe you have Oracle, SQL, Exchange, things like that that you just want to be very, very granular and very specific with. First, maybe those are your absolute money makers and we need to bring those back up online. So again, you have a lot of different options for granularity restores, virtual machine restores, or just full-blown restores of the entire environment. Now, the next thing I want to talk about here on our next slide is knowing that we're protected. Now, knowing that we're protected really comes from one specific type of application that Veeam has inside of its queue, right? And that's going to be at the very bottom, and it's called Veeam 1. Now, Veeam 1, at the end of the day, this is a monitoring and analytics tool. This is going to be your eyes and ears to all of your different sites, your robo locations, co-locations, or just production space. Really doesn't matter there. Now, it can do a ton of different types of reports. Anything from under an overused virtual machine, data store growth. Hey, is there some type of ransomware alarm going on? And that ransomware alarm specifically that I'm talking about is, hey, maybe this virtual machine has been sitting at 100 gigs for the last 3 years. And all of a sudden, last night, it shot up to 1 terabyte. Something's a little fishy with that, right? That's a lot of change rate data for one night. So it's going to kind of give you those types of alarms and the types of alerting. And those are just a few that I have off the top of my head. There's I think 250 plus different alarms that you can do in there. It's a very great tool for understanding and knowing that you're protected and your assets are making sure that they're protected. And I think that's probably the biggest thing there. Now, here on my next slide, I want to get more into the security side of the Veeam perspective, which is the immutable side of backup. Now, some of you guys may have heard of immutable backup. Some of you guys go, what is an immutable backup? And either side of the fence, I think that you're going to have some learning experiences on either. So let me tell you what an immutable backup first is. This is a repository that can either sit on premise or in object storage. In this particular case, when we're talking about a Hardened Linux repository, we're talking about on-premise. And this is a way that you can have a repository that's on-prem that you push the backups to directly, and that's the first landing zone. Now, that first landing zone is absolutely very, very strategic and very important to the overall schema of what you're trying to do in the backup realm, right? You don't want to push to something that's not encrypted, just like Carl was saying earlier. Now, just taking a little bit step back here on the Linux side, what an immutable repository is once the data gets landed there, the data is not able to be overwritten. It can always be restored from, but the overwritten part is pretty much a no-go. It's going to tell them to kick rocks or pound sand. And overwritten also at the same time means deleted, right? So it can't be deleted, it can't be modified, but it can be restored. So if you need to do any type of restore facilitation inside of that particular window, by all means, you absolutely can. Now, here on our next slide, I'm going to go over a little bit more of what the Hardened Linux repository is and some of the defining feature sets that really make it a class above everything else. So why do we choose it at the end of the day? The biggest reason that we choose an immutable repository over like an NTFS or an REFS or a hyperscaler is truly immutability. This is coming down for peace of mind for admins and peace of mind for the guy that owns the company, right? So you know that the data is going to be secure regardless. Now, I also want to say that making sure that this malware safe repository is set up properly is very, very, very important. There's a couple different things that, honestly, if you don't know what you're doing, and I'm not saying you have to be like some crazy Linux admin and know the PowerShell and command line just like nobody's business. No, it's just making sure that you understand some of how Linux works compared to like a Windows platform. I can tell you from personal experience, there's a lot of admins that can walk through a Windows platform like nobody's business, but really struggle to get through Linux. And honestly, there's a lot of different differences between the two distros. So that's one of the biggest things I want to say out there. Now, the other big thing that, and how we actually manipulate the data is with what's called an immutable flag. This immutable flag is set per se. Think of like you're setting a flag in the ground. Basically, that's saying, hey, you cannot delete anything that's in this particular pile of data. Now, once the new pile of data comes in, the flag gets moved to the new data. The old data is technically not immutable anymore because it's not the most current piece of data. And sure, if they get that, sure, they could manipulate it, but they can't get your most current backups, which has all your change blocks, CRC checks, and checksums, which is your newest, most current pieces of data. Now, the last thing I want to talk about on the Hardened Linux repository is actually going to be on our last slide here. And I think this is actually probably one of the most important parts, is how we actually connect. So we use a non-root account. So for you guys that are more Linux-based, Windows-based, this is like top-level domain credentials, right? We're not using top-level domain credentials in the Linux world, which is called non-root. And that's going to allow us to have more segregation for the admins and the segregation of levels of change of commandments, right? Now, the other big thing that we're going to use is we're going to leverage XFS. XFS is a great way to do a whole bunch of things with cloning and leveraging the change blocks and really making sure that we can store as much possible data in there, the tightest pack that we possibly can for the compression and dedupe side as well. So really, really big stuff here. The last thing I want to draw your eyes to before I move on from this slide is that little tiny green checkbox at the very bottom of the screen where it says, hey, make these backups immutable for 30 days. Now, you can mark that 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever that may be for you guys, but just make sure that you have it in a timely fashion. Don't make it too far out. Don't make it too short. Give yourself some run rate and some space for that. And that's really the biggest thing I want to really push for the Hardened Linux repository. So that's the last thing I want to touch on with the Hardened Linux repository. The last thing here I want to talk about is archive tier. Not the last thing, that was a mistake of words. Archive tier is really what I want to touch on. Now, what you're looking at right here is really the mythology of Sober. Some of you guys may have heard of Sober. Maybe you guys, are laughing a little bit. Sober in the Veeam world is a scale-out backup repository job. We call it SOBR. Basically, it's just shortened because if we said scale-out backup repository job all day long, I would just have more of a headache at the end of the day. Now, how is this broken down? So Sober is broken down into two tiers. We have performance tier, we have capacity tier, and I'll touch on that archive tier, which is the newest tier. But ultimately, those two kind of fit together. All right, so performance tier. So when I want you guys to think of Veeam and I want you guys to think of, just Sober in general, performance tier is the local repository. So we have to land local before we move that data to object storage. Think of like phoenixNAP, for instance. So with that performance tier, that could be an NVMe, that could be SSD, that could be a NAS drive, that could be fiber channel LUN, that could be iSCSI. Whatever that may be, as long as we're presenting to Veeam as quote-unquote local storage, that's where we're going to land first. Once it's landed on that performance tier, we can then move it into capacity tier, then to archive tier. Now, what is capacity tier? This is honestly just object storage. This could be Amazon, this could be Azure, this could be GCP, Wasabi, IBM, whoever that may be for your capacity tier, even phoenixNAP, for instance. But this is just object storage in general. So that is just the capacity tier, and that's just the move of that we can move from the on-premise to the capacity tier. And really this whole slide is made around archive tier. So archive tier is a newer tier for Veeam, and specifically inside of the sober realm. This allows us to move active fulls to more cheaper and deeper storage. So a lot of times I've always heard, hey, I want to go to Glacier Deep Archive. Hey, I want to go to Blob Storage Archive, but I don't necessarily want to have all my incrementals, and I want to have, a little bit of separation between the two of incrementals and active fulls, because active fulls I'll probably never really touch unless something significantly bad has happened. And that is honestly the true case, right? You never want to pull from cold tier, but when you do, it's pretty much the worst case, and that's where we're pulling from. So that's just allowing us to do GFS, or grandfather, father, son backups to object storage, and the more of the long-term storage archival. All right, so coming up here on my next slide, the next thing I want to talk about is continuous data protection. A lot of people hear this and hear CDP. This is exactly what I'm talking about. And this is near zero RPOs, right? So what we're going to really do is we're going to minimize the most amount of time that we can for data loss and recoverability to the last point in state. So here on our next slide, I'm going to go over what that looks like on an overview. So just bear with me. This is one of those other diagrams. I think it's sometimes a little hard to follow, and I'll do my absolute best to give you all the information and the information in the best possible format. So where I really want to start with is this is going to be a CDP component breakdown in data flow. All right, so what I want you guys to first focus on is that guy in the middle. He's the coordinator, or the CDP coordinator. Think of him as like the top level manager. He makes all the rules for everything. He communicates with vCenter. He assigns replica tasks. He's kind of the man, right? And then we have a source filter. This source filter runs on ESXi. It intercepts IO requests, and it filters like instances like vdisk and some other stuff like that, right? Really managing those IO filters and the cluster stuff like that, okay? And then we have, on the other side, we have the source daemon. The source daemon basically acts as the admin of the host to communicate directly with the CDP coordinator. So he's talking directly to the man to get information on the proxies, the filters, the relays, traffic routes, basically kind of like the traffic cop of CDP, right? He's the guy that's talking to the boss, understanding the rules, understanding the connections, understanding everything and all the different flows, and really starting to articulate those to the corresponding components. Now, we talked about the source daemon. Now we need to talk about the source proxy. This source proxy is honestly the workhorse of CDP. He's aggregating changes from the filter. He's doing storage. He's doing RAM. He's doing disk I/O. He's completing like replica states and compression and encryption, right? So he's really, truly the workhorse of the CDP side. And the last two things I want to talk about is the target proxy. What does the target proxy ultimately do? It receives and blocks source and compression data, right? And then it also decrypts the data as well. So something that it also does a lot of lift and shift, but on the opposite side, right? And the last thing I want to talk about is the target daemon and filter. Basically, what does this do? It filters any inactive failover. It's making sure that data stores are getting written to. If they're not getting written to, it's understanding why. It's a lot of stuff here, and I've probably lost a couple of you in there. I know I usually do, just because there's a lot of information that comes from CDP. CDP is one of those heavy lifts and shifts. All right, and the last thing I will say, and it's on the very right-hand side, it's the filter for the target basically acts as a failback. All right, so that was my little spiel here. I really hope that you guys got a lot of information out from the Veeam perspective. I'm going to pass this over to one of my Platinum BCSP partners, Carl. He's going to be able to take it from here.
Thank you so much for that, Michael. And always interesting to hear out what guys at Veeam are working on. And from here on, I want to give you out a little bit of information on how we are utilizing Veeam services and Veeam products to be able to bake that into a number of products that we offer in this area. So Data Security Cloud is basically our virtualized cloud environment that is our topmost cloud security environment by default that we provide for customers. We bake in Veeam backups there, but it is also our target location, target product for any DRES requirements that customers might also be looking at. So this really comes as a out-of-the-box product bundled in with all the security requirements needed, and then some tiers, additional tiers that we have in order to increase certain security posture on some of the most specific requirements. But we'll talk a little bit about that in the next slides. Veeam Cloud Connect. So here is the cloud target backup that we provide. Basically, we have shared a number of storage repositories in our data centers residing in highly secured infrastructure. And what we're doing is basically grabbing the technologies that Mike was mentioning earlier: immutability, data protection, disaster recovery. We're bundling in object storage together with that for scale-out backup repository. So this is really our tried and tested solution for customers, where we can make cloud repositories available to them and have easier pay-per-model use for our customers. Veeam disaster recovery. So as mentioned, we provide a number of solutions around disaster recovery, whether that's in respect to using Veeam already, which we know most of you are, or whether or not more inclined to having the ability to increase that coupled with hosting your infrastructure production environments within our data security cloud. So that comes hand in hand on how we are able to leverage our products to work together for our customers. And managed backup for Microsoft Office 365. We are one of the first providers who are providing this solution for customers utilizing Office 365. Again, we know how important this is for you. There's some misconception that I'm sure you've heard on before, or have heard Veeam on before, where the data residing on Microsoft 365 is highly available, but rather, or if ever, not being backed up, right, or having a secondary location of that data, that crucial data that we all know most of us are now storing terabytes of data, considering the low cost consumption for mail data. That is one of the areas which includes, remember, SharePoint and Teams files, so that also makes it a big repository that one needs to take care of. Moving on to the next slide is a bit more in detail on the Data Security Cloud product that we provide. A secured by design product where we have invested heavily into physical security that I've mentioned earlier, into network security. We are utilizing latest and greatest tools from VMware in order to be able to present this compute, which is coupled with Intel SGX for confidential computing, a partner here that we've been working with for a very long time. Fast and high quality random number generator, firmware assurances, easily scalable in order for you to be able to scale without any security commitments. Rapid deployment, easy to scale, easy to expand, whether that's in one of our data centers in Phoenix, where we can also be able to provide second site location for customers running their production environments with us as well. PCI compliant, HIPAA ready as well, so we have more information that we can be able to provide you there. And the idea that we wanted to shape Data Security Cloud basically is to be able to have integrated backups with it. This is a very crucial point. Why? Because being a Veeam partner for a long time, right? We're able to get in touch with them to be able to spin up this product. The ability to have integrated backups by default for us is like saying, hey, why do you need to purchase backup as an add-on, right? Why wouldn't it be something that is bundled in by default? So that's something we're very proud of that we have achieved. Managed detection and response, right? Being able to provide those intrusion detection mechanisms on top of the data security cloud environment. Threat intelligence, microsegmentation, security enhanced high performance hardware. So basically what we're saying is best in class from Veeam, best in class from our partners from AlertLogic to be able to provide managed detection and response. Sophos for threat intelligence, antiviruses, Intercept X products that they have. We have also bundled these together with this product. VMware NSX for high operability network and security tools, and Intel Xeon scalable processors to provide that high performance hardware, both in terms of processor and to be able to provide confidential computing that is supported by Intel. Very something innovative there. Moving on to the next slide, where we can lay out a little bit of the features that involves data security cloud. We have two tiers essentially, one essentials, one advanced. Both of them have Veeam backups included with them, so there's no way to even opt that out of the product because we bundle it in with the contracted solution for data security cloud. vCPU and VRAM, where we're providing the compute side of things. Storage, where we're providing multiple tiers of storage, whether you have IOPS dependent or you want that specific object storage repositories that we can provide. Bandwidth, we also bundle in some bandwidth there as well. Endpoint protection from Sophos. Veeam backup, the only difference here, 50% of the allocated storage that we cover with essentials. And for a small delta on the price there, we can provide 100% on the allocated storage, which is very value for money on the protected storage that one can provide there. Expert SOC support, obviously, on both tiers, antivirus, and also the last item in green there at the very bottom, HSM grade encryption, where we can help you with any HSM grade requirements, like creating key management systems or being able to generate tokens and secrets. So very interesting solution that we are providing today with Fortanix. So please reach out on that item specifically for more information. Moving on to the next slide, where we're high level idea on the benefits of this product. High grade, reliable hardware, right, powered by Intel. And one thing that can understand, right, is having Intel processors that are supporting Intel SGX by default shows how innovative we are at deploying these high-end chipsets within our data centers. Unparalleled security when it comes to physical security, network security, being able to vet our teams, being able to vet your data. No complexities, the reduction on your headaches that you've had in the past to be able to procure resources, to be able to migrate and manage data, right? Easier ways to scale up. And also our teams are very highly focused on what products we are providing here. Cost efficiency, we want to remain very committed to being competitive in the market. We know the number of cloud service providers that are increasing in our area, so we want to make sure that we don't reduce the way we provide on value, but rather still be competitive on having that value provisioned for you. Going on to the next slide, and how we have been a successful partnership with Veeam Platinum providers for a number of years. Being able to lower your capex, right, going through a cloud provider like us would be able to help you understand and even define the number of products and services that we offer and align those with what you want, because Veeam has a number of products in their suite. So it would be our promise to be able to help you on understanding what costs would be involved and to actually lower your TCO, existing TCO that you have on backups. Automated replication across six locations worldwide. Dedicated portal for billing, monitoring, and access controls. Certified Veeam engineers working with us to be able to maintain the infrastructure. Instant recovery from disasters without downtime. Easy access to immutability and insider protection. So these are all the technologies that we have worked with Veeam to implement in our portfolio, and we're happy to discuss with you on how you can consume any of these services that Mike mentioned earlier as well. So currently we have a 20% off on this product, Data Security Cloud. Reach out for more information. One other thing that I forgot to mention is with Disaster Recovery as a Service, something that we're also very proud of, we provide 1 yearly try on failing over to the actual repository that you would have procured from us in terms of disaster recovery. So most companies do not offer this. We believe that customers need to see the value of this happening, and even could be part of their failover plans that they might include. So it's something that we can help with. Again, 20% off on Data Security Cloud. Can reach us out on that email link there or on the /promotions. All right, so moving on, would like to put down a poll question for you. Would you like to talk to us? Would you like to understand a little bit more about the products that we offer? We can even include Veeam in our conversations to be able to align with the requirements that you need. So feel free to put your vote there. Thank you. All right. So I would like to go to the section of Q&A. Feel free to post those questions that you have for us, whether that's for Mike or any of the Veeam technologies that you mentioned, or for myself for any phoenixNAP related products that I've mentioned earlier. So. Okay, we seem to have first question here. What kind of compliance does Data Security Cloud cover? So yes, very good question. Briefly explain this in one of the slides, but basically we have we are PCI compliant, we have Privacy Shield compliance, GDPR for customers operating in Europe, SOC 1, SOC 2. Obviously, there comes to specific requirements where auditing would still be necessary. So we're here to supply with a product which is secured by default from the level of technologies, from the level of support that we provide, but also from the certifications, the industry certifications and regulations that is, as most of you know, challenging to align with, but that's something that our customers would be able to make use of through our products. So that's a great thing to include by default with Data Security Cloud product. Okay, I think maybe we can share this question as well coming in. Is insider protection included in Data Security Cloud? So the insider protection specifically is not included by default, but we offer that as a managed service on top of the product, on top of Data Security Cloud. So we do include the backups as part of Data Security Cloud, but the insider protection feature per se, which is something really interesting that even Mike was sharing before on this, we can provide this as a managed service, whether that is with Data Security Cloud or even with our Veeam Cloud Connect product. Okay, feel free to post any questions. So I think I can share one last question here. Is air gapping the same as making immutable copies? So I'm not sure I'm understanding correctly, but what the user is referring here is whether immutable copies and air gapping are the same thing. So in general, immutable copies can be reached, but not modified, right? So they can be reached to be able to store data. The repositories can be able to be in write mode, but they cannot, and data that has been placed there cannot be modified. With insider protection feature, it becomes really inaccessible, right? Even if someone hacks into the network, even if someone tries to make an impact into going into those 3-to-1 repositories that Mike mentioned earlier, that's where insider protection comes in place. So immutability and insider protection are two really very important things that phoenixNAP supports for customers who are looking at providing that air-gapped solutions there for their backups and data. And with that, I thank you for joining us here today. I would like to thank Mike from Veeam, who was able to share his time and very insightful information, and our administration team who are working in the background to be able to present this for you today. Mike, any final notes from your end?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Carl. I think this was a great webinar, and I definitely got a lot out of it, so I do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.